Marie Forleo bills her signature course, B School, as, quote, the ultimate system to grow your business and own your freedom. It's the subhead on the sales page. Now scroll down a bit and you'll see how she defines freedom. Live where you want, take on clients you want, charge what you want, go where you want. Next to that is the related value of prosperity. Quote, a dream business can set you up for a life of financial freedom in any economy. Rachel Rogers claims her membership is where fun meets financial freedom. Amy Porterfield's website is emblazoned with the headline, an online business equals freedom in how you work and how much you earn. Productivity guru Ari Meisel claims automation and outsourcing are the keys to freedom. Quote, your greatest success, freedom, and fulfillment depends on you taking the leap and doing less. Freedom seems to be a good business to be in. But what is it that marketers, influencers, and gurus, or rather their copywriters, mean when they say freedom? Freedom from what? Freedom to what? In the United States, we hear about our freedom all the time. It's a free country, we say. We have freedom of speech. It's the land of the free and the home of the brave. We love the free market. So why then do I need to buy my freedom for the low, low price of $1,997? I'm Tara McMullen, and this is What Works, the show about rethinking work, business, and leadership for the 21st century economy. Online marketers didn't invent the freedom grift. The business of freedom, both literal and metaphorical, is ancient. So I'm not going to try and recap that whole history and its many socioeconomic implications in this episode. Instead, I want to focus on one freedom-oriented marketing campaign that laid the groundwork for today's headlines. That marketing campaign? It's the reason that the United States doesn't have a national health insurance program like the rest of the developed world. And it begins with two young and ambitious writers in Northern California. It's 1933, and Leonie Baxter works as the manager of the Reading Chamber of Commerce in Northern California. Born in 1906, Baxter is a 26-year-old widow and former writer for the Portland Oregonian. For what it's worth, she tells an interviewer in 1992 that she was just a fresh-faced 18-year-old planning to work for a few years before heading off to university.
Age is only in the mind.
Baxter catches the eye of Sheridan Downey, a prominent California Democrat who hires her to work on a public relations campaign aiming to defeat a referendum on that year's ballot. Downey also hires former journalist turned media entrepreneur turned ad man Clem Whitaker. Downey suggests that Baxter and Whitaker team up. They do, and the campaign they engineer for Downey is a success. That same year, Whitaker and Baxter start Campaigns, Inc., widely considered the first political consulting firm in the world. Their next big project is the 1934 California governor's race between incumbent Republican Frank Merriam and muckraking journalist and author Upton Sinclair, a Democrat. Merriam wasn't a popular governor, but Sinclair posed a threat to California's big industries, on account of his prioritizing the health, safety, and wallets of workers. So industry threw their support behind Merriam. Whitaker and Baxter pass on an opportunity to work for Merriam because, well, they didn't think he was a very good governor. They pass on the chance to work for Sinclair because, well, I'll let Leonie Baxter tell you herself. This clip is from a 1992 interview for a documentary about the Great Depression, archived by the Washington University Film and Media Archives and the Library of Congress. Now, if you'd like a visual to go along with the voice, Baxter looks shockingly like Barbara Bush, but with the smugness of Margaret Thatcher. She's wearing a navy blue suit with pleated shoulders and 2 rows of big brass buttons up the front. There's also a massive rhinestone flag pin above her heart. Because of course there is.
Particularly his writings in respect to the church, the institution of marriage, religion in general. And we thought that some of his observations and beliefs were so bothersome to normal householders, normal voters. Of course, we recognize that these writings of his, this type of writing, was done, of course. These were done to sell. And they did sell. Apparently, they were read everywhere because people do like to read that type of thing. But they were not suitable they did not fit the role of a governor properly at all.
So instead of the 2 top-of-the-ticket candidates, Whitaker and Baxter sign on with George Hatfield, the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor who ran opposite Sinclair's running mate, Sheridan Downey, who you'll remember was Whitaker and Baxter's matchmaker. Whitaker and Baxter set about sinking Sinclair's campaign using his own words against him. Spotlighting quotes from Sinclair's nonfiction and fiction alike, Campaigns Inc. paints him as out of touch with the values and traditions of the average Californian. They commission cartoons and posters to bring Sinclair's supposed views to the masses.
He said after that campaign that the blot of Sinclairism, cartoons, did him more damage than anything else that happened in his campaign because they were built around direct quotes of his.
He's smeared as a communist whose policies aimed at ending poverty would invite a, quote, horde of outsiders into the state looking for a handout. Some things never change. Merriam wins the governor's race in a landslide. Sinclair takes to the papers to explain why he lost. And Whitaker and Baxter? Well, they're just getting started. After Whitaker leaves his first wife, the business partners marry in 1938. Between 1933 and 1948, 58 of the 63 legislative campaigns they worked on were successful. In 1948, Campaigns Inc. is hired by the American Medical Association to work on turning the public against President Truman's plan for a national health insurance program. Before we get there, though, we need to take a short detour into the history of the American Medical Association and the professionalization of medicine. The American Medical Association, or AMA, was founded in 1847 and acts as a professional association and lobbying group for doctors. Medicine, of course, wasn't always a profession, nor was the title of doctor regulated by years of extensive training and testing. Over the course of the 19th century, medicine became professionalized. Now, on the one hand, professionalization aims to protect the public by keeping out grifters and quacks. It raises standards and ensures some consistency in an industry. But on the other hand, it's a way to discredit or even criminalize ways of knowing and practicing that don't conform to those of the people in power. In other words, professionalization tends to remove women, Indigenous people, and people from outside Western white society from the ranks of experts and practitioners. What's more, professionalization robs the public of the knowledge and experience of gendered and racialized practitioners. At the same time, professionalization raises the status and wealth of those, primarily white men, who do pass the test. It reproduces hierarchy and productizes services once integrated into community care. the American Medical Association was integral to the professionalization of medicine in the United States and actively sought to influence lawmakers to adopt AMA-backed positions, including standards for pharmaceuticals, vaccine guidelines, and fluoridated water supplies. But they also advocated at various times for limiting the supply of doctors, including successfully pushing for a cap on Medicare reimbursement for training residents in 1997. You can draw a straight line between our current doctor shortage and AMA lobbying. So yes, the AMA has benefited public health. Still, it's also significantly contributed to the high cost of healthcare, the disparity in outcomes across racial and gender lines, and the big businessification of health. Now, speaking of big business, that brings us to where Whitaker and Baxter cross paths with the AMA. In 1948, after 16 years of the New Deal, industry groups like the AMA looked forward to electing a more pro-business president. Harry Truman, who became president after FDR passed away shortly into his fourth term, runs as an unpopular incumbent. His challenger, Thomas Dewey, is widely expected to win. But if you'll recall that famous photo of Truman holding up the paper that calls the election wrong, Truman pulls off the surprise win. And pro-industry forces mobilize to defeat further progressive reforms, including the National Health Insurance Program Truman introduced in 1945, just 6 months after taking over the presidency. Now, of the people aware of Truman's plan, nearly 60% of Americans favor it, and only 25% oppose it. Fearing a loss of income if the plan is enacted, the doctors of the AMA vehemently oppose Truman's plan. Whitaker and Baxter were a natural choice to lead the public relations effort against national health insurance. The California Medical Association had tapped them to help defeat Governor Earl Warren's statewide health insurance program earlier in 1945. The campaign centered on encouraging Californians to voluntarily purchase coverage through the CMA's Blue Shield plan, which offered prepayment for medical services. After Dewey's defeat, the AMA came looking for a bigger, better sequel. In 1949, when Whitaker and Baxter began flooding the zone with messages about how national health insurance was a threat to health and a threat to freedom, support for a national health insurance program falls, and opposition rises stiffly.
Could be very unpopular.
By the end of 1950, the numbers have flip-flopped. 61% of people now oppose the plan, 24% approve of it. The conditions of the debate over national health insurance in 1948 look very different than the conditions today, even if the rhetoric is shockingly similar. The most common forms of health insurance at the time were Blue Shield, which were prepaid medical services administered through state medical associations, and Blue Cross, which were prepaid medical services administered by hospitals. Separate insurance companies largely sold life insurance and didn't cover medical services. Today, we frame the debate as publicly funded healthcare versus insurance as a product you or your employer buys in the market. But the debate then hinged on normalizing and increasing demand for health insurance as a product in the first place. A new paper by two Harvard economists, Marcella Olson and Yusra Nebere, finds that Whitaker and Baxter, along with the AMA, were quite successful. Not only did approval for national health insurance plummet, but purchases of private health insurance jumped. The message of that successful marketing campaign can be summed up in one word: freedom. Whitaker and Baxter labeled first the California Health Insurance Plan and then the National Health Insurance Plan as compulsory insurance. Now, that's like saying that Social Security is compulsory retirement savings or that unemployment insurance is a compulsory rainy day fund. It's not exactly untrue, but it's a deliberate framing meant to contrast the program with the freedom to buy. The campaign also promoted the idea that a national health insurance plan would constitute, quote, socialized medicine.
Totally un-American. Oh, and you know what else is un-American?
This echoed existing messages warning against the encroaching influence of communism and socialism in America. And it is, of course, still a message used today. Now, Whitaker and Baxter added to the heat of the campaign by coordinating with other industries to place advertisements echoing these messages in newspapers across the country. Walgreens ran an ad asserting that, quote,
free America has no place for a bureaucracy that stands between people and progress, between doctor and patient, between physician and pharmacist.
The Dillon Implement Company exhorted,
let's keep the voluntary system in America. Voluntary insurance, voluntary manufacturing, voluntary buying and selling are all part of American freedom.
And a clothing retailer ran an ad contrasting rugged individualism with ragged socialism and supported the doctors who are fighting for freedom. The connection between business, consumption, and freedom was not a new invention of the 1930s and 40s. It was baked into the first colonies in what is now the United States. It was manifest in our own brand of settler colonialism. It's enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Its transformation into the distinctly American spirit of capitalism was central to Max Weber's 1904 thesis about the Protestant ethic. However, the growth of the private health insurance industry, falling standards of care, and the exorbitant cost of it all is fueling a freedom-based backlash.
This is un-American. You don't pay for health insurance. That's crazy.
Today, policies and proposals that aim to expand access to affordable health care are broadly popular, as long as the survey asks about them without raising the specter of partisan identity. According to Gallup, 62% of Americans believe the government should be responsible for ensuring all Americans have healthcare coverage. 51% have a negative view of the healthcare industry, while more than 60% have a negative view of the pharmaceutical industry. A majority of Americans, 78%, are concerned about the cost of care. 52% are dissatisfied with the quality of care. And 69% believe the healthcare system as a whole is either in crisis or suffers from major problems. The costs associated with the U.S. quote-unquote voluntary health insurance system are only partly financial. Another cost is our ability to access care at all. As evidenced by the outpouring of anger toward health insurance companies after the murder of the United Healthcare CEO last week, people don't feel free to navigate the medical system as they or their doctors would prefer. People feel trapped by prior authorizations, managed care, and restrictions on what doctors or practices are approved by their plans. They're exhausted by the letters, forms, and phone calls required to beg for the health of their loved ones. As early as the 1980s, scholars began noticing a trend of deprofessionalization among doctors and other health professionals. That is, health professionals were rapidly losing their autonomy and increasingly subject to the demands of health insurance companies. The health insurance industry shifted the terms of the doctor-patient relationship from a social one to an economic one. Doctors were now providers. Patients were members of a health plan. And far from provisioning health, a health plan was merely an insurance product. Doctors Deborah Ehrlich and Joseph Gravel argue that this deprofessionalizing and commoditizing language reinforces the notion that physicians are at the whim of insurance companies. Their own judgment is undermined, and their identity as trained experts who want to help the people they work with is erased. Doctors feel powerless and alienated, leading to worse health outcomes for patients and increasing rates of burnout among physicians and residents. Ehrlich and Gravel write, quote, "Deprofessionalization of physicians therefore harms the public by eroding trust, surrendering individual physicians' clinical judgment to utilitarian cost-cutting algorithms, creating conflicts of interest, and potentially dissuading altruistic, humanistic people from entering medicine." If you remember, professionalization expels non-dominant practices in people. But deprofessionalization, well, it doesn't reverse that process. Instead, commodifying and economizing the profession further entrenches status quo power, this time in the form of financial products and capital accumulation. In turn, deprofessionalization opens the door to grift. What is grift? I like YouTuber and podcaster Matt Bernstein's definition of a grift.
The way that I sometimes explain what a grifter is to people who are unfamiliar with it is like, I think there's this idea that when you have a microphone, you are expressing your opinion to an audience who can then choose to agree or disagree. And you're attracting an audience based on, people who are interested in what you have to say. What I think a grifter does is they take kind of the temperature of the room of what do people want me to say, or where is the most money in what I can say, and then they say that thing. It's actually like going in the other direction where they're following their audience instead of their audience following them. But the audience oftentimes doesn't realize that.
Think of all the people hawking supplements, extolling the virtues of cleanses, and warning against vaccines. They're part of a freedom-based backlash against an industry that makes people feel profoundly unfree. The political campaigns of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Oz, as well as their now appointments to high-level policymaking positions, are also part of this grift, part of this backlash. Companies that claim to increase access to popular drugs that treat everything from erectile dysfunction to ADHD to obesity to depression, they're also part of the grift. People want health, not health insurance. So if you can sell health outside the existing medical system, well, you've got a solid grift. And that brings us back to where we started. When I first started researching the origin story of America's terrible health insurance system, I expected to find a tale of greed and a pattern of hoodwinking voters. And I did. But I also found something much, much bigger. I found the vapid and disingenuous co-optation of freedom. I saw the same pattern of equating freedom with consumption that helps reinforce our vast wealth inequality today. I heard promises that strangely echoed the sales pitches of today's influencers and gurus. I found people scratching for freedom and winding up with something that more closely resembles a Happy Meal. In philosophy and social theory, there is often a useful distinction between freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from connotes the absence of control and oppression. It's what we've been taught to think of as freedom in most liberal capitalist democracies. Freedom to, however, asks what conditions are necessary for us to live meaningful lives and pursue our desires. Importantly, there is no freedom to for me if there is no freedom to for you. Our freedom and the conditions that help us realize it comes with social responsibility. Financial freedom, health freedom, entrepreneurial freedom, educational freedom, time freedom, lifestyle freedom. These sales pitches can't offer freedom to. They only ever offer freedom from broken systems and social responsibility. Now, I'm never going to look down on people who take action to rid themselves of the burdens of broken systems. Many people are understandably frustrated and desperate. Sooner or later, we all go looking for relief. No, I save my scorn for those who promise relief they cannot provide, who sell freedom in the form of exploitation, who transform our authentic yearning for liberation into a buy now button. It's true what they say. Freedom isn't free, but it's not for sale either. It's not a product you can buy off the shelf or a coach you can hire. If you're looking for freedom inside an online course, investment opportunity, or supplement bottle, I encourage you to reconsider. Shrugging off the 9-to-5 job, building up your passive income streams, or avoiding the traditional medical system might ease some immediate pain. But it also makes it difficult to realize what we need to create a truer, lasting, positive freedom. In his new book, On Freedom, Timothy Snyder writes, "Negative freedom, that is, freedom from, is not a misunderstanding, but a repressive idea. It is itself a barrier of an intellectual and moral kind. It blocks us from seeing what we would need to be free." The things we buy and the services we sell might very well be useful, even valuable, but they'll never be freedom.